All right. Good afternoon. My name is Haleigh Horan, and today I am joined with Mr. Mubin Shaikh. And on behalf of the In Network, I would like to thank you for taking the time to speak with me today about your career and the future of national security. To start off, would you mind kind of providing the listeners with a brief overview of your background, such as how you got here, the various roles you've had, and then, we can delve into further topics as we continue.
Sure. So thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to talk to the folks at the In Network. Um, Basically, my story kind of begins with a period of radicalization in my early 20s. Um, I became radicalized for a while. I don't want to gloss over how I got here, how I got there, but it's such a dumb story. Like I had a house party. When I was a teenager, I got caught at the house party by my uncle. The shame and the guilt really made me try to convince myself that the only way I could kind of salvage my reputation was to quote unquote get religious. And it started off with a non-extremist Islamic group, but it continued to escalate. And that's the radicalization process, right? It's an increasingly extreme progression of views, right? Which may or may not result in violence. So basically, I got radicalized. I became increasingly extreme. And then actually what happened is I got married and that calmed me down quite a bit. But then 9/11 happened, and that's what really kind of pushed me to reconsider what I was thinking about and inclining towards. Um, that then prompted me, I realized I didn't know Arabic and Islamic studies in any formal way. So I would move from Canada and take up residency in Syria for 2 years, where I studied Arabic and Islamic studies. I was introduced to the traditional Islam, and excuse me, and that's how I basically came to de-radicalize. I came to realize that those views that I had subscribed to were incorrect, were un-Islamic, and I also had this newfound appreciation for the rights that we have in the West. I was living in Syria. It was a real police state. And uh, I heard some horror stories over there, and I just thought to myself, wow, maybe the Kufar West isn't so bad after all. So I came back to Canada. The first week that I got back, the first Canadian had been arrested on terrorism charges. So the kind of like the post 9/11 legislation that a lot of countries had started instituting. So I knew that guy who was arrested from my childhood. I saw a reference to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service in the article, and I called them up and I said, "Hey, I know this guy. It must be a mistake." But obviously, his life went in one direction, and my life went in another direction. And they said, "Well, it's no mistake, but we want to come and talk to you." And so the intelligence service approached me, or we met and we spoke. I basically told them my life story. They liked what they heard. They said, we would really like for you to work for us undercover, to teach us, to tell us who's the legitimate target for investigation and who isn't.
Hmm.
So that's what began, or that's how my intelligence work began. So I did that for some years. One of the cases, like it was just like any other case that I was dealing with, it ended up becoming a police investigation, which meant that I had to traverse over from the service to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police as a police agent. And then, excuse me,
Okay.
and that case ran 6 months with the police. Um, 18 individuals were arrested uh, because
This
of
is
that
the Toronto
investigation.
18 case,
Yeah,
right? Okay.
yeah, this was the Toronto 18 case. And then began 5 legal hearings that stretched over 4 years. So there were, youth preliminary hearing, adult preliminary hearing, um, a trial by judge alone of one remaining young accused, an abuse of process motion where they entertained the entrapment argument. There was, of course, no entrapment. And then there was a trial by jury of three remaining adult accused, all of whom were found guilty. 2010, the case is done. I get into social media, kind of doing the Muslim counterterrorism thing. And 2011, the war in Syria kicks off. And by 2012, we're already seeing the rise of ISIS in real time on social media. So I was already online. I had some fake accounts that I used to insert myself into some of their networks. Those networks grew into ISIS networks. So I was already embedded in those networks very early on. And the US government actually reached out to me and asked me to come and assist some teams to kind of support various anti-ISIS activities and operations. Um, so from 2012 to 2018 was really the heyday of anti-ISIS activities. So this is where I crossed paths with mostly the U.S. military, mostly special operations community who were doing a lot of the specialized activities against them. And really just across the board, anyone from like at the diplomatic level, so meeting in diplomatic circles, I addressed the United Nations General Assembly, the UN Security Council, and then various parliaments of government, military officers. I was doing instruction, pre-deployment instruction for a lot of folks who were going over to fight ISIS. By 2018, with the fall of Baghouz and largely the end of the major war against ISIS, it kind of went on for a couple more years. 2020, that's when, of course, COVID hit. Um, and so it's in this time that I just met with all kinds of people from all different backgrounds doing all sorts of things, and that's what basically brought me here. So
Nice. That's a very extensive background. It's a good thing that your path ended up going the right way. Um,
yes.
and that you kind of immersed yourself into the culture that you were in and got that formal background to help you make that decision. Kind of going back to your original, um, or not original, the beginning of your story, kind of what led you to Pakistan and India specifically, when you left Toronto at such a young age. I believe it was what, 19?
Yeah, I was 19. So I'm Indian background. My parents are from India. And there's a well-known religious organization that is very prominent in the subcontinent, Indo-Pak subcontinent. It's called the Tabligh Jamaat. The Tabligh Jamaat is a group that what they encourage is for people to go and spend 4 months, 2 months in India, 2 months in Pakistan, to basically get an immersion uh, style experience where you're, living in the mosque. You're just moving from mosque to mosque. You basically stage up in an area. You go into the local community. You see where the Muslims are. You invite them to the mosque because you have the organization. You've set up a bunch of programs, so like after, the prayer number four, the Maghrib prayer, there will be a talk, please come, we're inviting you, blah, blah, blah. Or, it could be after like Dhuhr prayer, the afternoon prayer. So we would have like after each prayer, different activities, and then we would be inviting local community members to those. So that's how the Tabligh Jamaat operated. That's why I ended up in India and Pakistan. And I want to note that Tabligh Jamaat is not it's not an extremist group at all. They're actually apolitical. They don't talk about politics at all. And what happened was when I got to Pakistan, I was sent to a city called Quetta. And Quetta at that time and to this day was and is a Taliban stronghold. Now, the Tabligh Jamaat is allowed to operate in those areas because, again, they're apolitical. They don't talk about politics. They don't criticize governments, politicians. So, the Taliban don't have a problem with them. Um, in fact, the Tabligh Jamaat is also present in Israel. And I've actually seen them there. In 1998, after I got married, I went on this wild honeymoon trip. I went to because I got married in Ramadan, and the last 10 days of Ramadan I spent in Medina and then Mecca. In Mecca, we did Eid. And then from there, we went to Egypt. From Egypt, we crossed through Rafah and into the Holy Lands, did the Holy Land tour there. Um, and I actually met some Tabligh Jamaat guys just on the street. They were just walking around. So it's not an extremist group. The fact that Israel allows them to do what they do, it tells you that they're not troublemakers. But going into Quetta and I would end up having this chance encounter with the Taliban. So when I told you we would go around the local area inviting people to the mosque, well, it just so happened that I chanced upon a group of Taliban soldiers who were there, and we invited them to the mosque. And they came, two of them came to the mosque. I personally think they came to check us out, like who are these Westerners and foreigners that came there? But they know the Tabligh Jamaat, and so it was fine. But I became enamored by them when I saw them, and that's what got me. So that escalation of radicalization, that was the next escalatory step. Kind of being interested in who they were and understanding their call. Their whole idea was that the Muslim world is in a bad state because we have left jihad. you know, I laugh now and it sounds so stupid, because it's totally false. But at the time, being a 19-year-old kid, looking for something that was resonating with my sacred values, something that had some a cool factor, if you will, because these guys had, a bunch of AK-47s and rocket propelled grenades, and I thought that was cool, right? A 19-year-old kid. And so that's how I ended up in India and Pakistan.
Okay. That's interesting. Um, so kind of going off of that, you were enamored by the Taliban and their when you were in that region. At what point on the path that you were on, like, did you realize, with jihadist thinking, this is no longer for me? And what kind of triggered your decision to leave that type of, world, I guess you could say?
Hmm. Yeah, so from 95 to 98, I just kept escalating. I ended up leaving the Tabligh Jamaat because they were not about the politics, they were not militant. And so I ended up moving towards a different group. This was like a Salafist based group. But these guys were like Salafi Takfiri, right? Like they declare everyone out of Islam, right? Of course, they're the only true Muslims, and everyone else is a deviant. Um, so I started to escalate my rhetoric. The people that I was hanging around with were also engaged in promoting this rhetoric. So I was doing a lot of dawah at the time, like inviting people, indoctrination, jihadi dawah, um, promoting this narrative, the so-called, global jihadi cause, that the West is against us, or the kuffar in general, the disbelievers. And it's used as a pejorative, right? Kuffar, right? Like disbelievers. Anyone who doesn't believe as they believe are kuffar. Technically, like kafir is one who knows the truth but deliberately conceals it and withholds it. So just because you don't believe in Islam or whatever doesn't make you a kafir per se, right? But that's the black and white thinking that they engage in, and that's a good way, a good label to other somebody. So I kept that up. Over those years, I saw some people, travel overseas and never came back. Um, and when it was 1998 when I got married, that when I say it calmed me down quite a bit, it did because in kind of retrospect, I think it met my intimacy needs, like the idea that you're supposed to get married and have a family, and that's how you're supposed to live. So I was now realizing that, right? I had acquired that now, and so um, was spending obviously time with my wife, but I was also still spending time with the other guys, and I could feel that from '98 to 2001 when the attacks happened, my interest was waning with these guys because it was like, I was just interested in other stuff now. Like I kind of was moving away from that. And then 9/11 was that final push to really make me think, you know what, this is not, I don't want to be part of this anymore. So it took some time. It was like a cumulative effect of some major, major events in my life,
Mhm.
major events like events which resonate with your sense of being, are very powerful enablers when it comes to kind of pushing people out of extremism.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Um, just to kind of hear that whole story of, you were in search for something and then, you met your wife and that led you to where you are now to kind of take that turn of like doing although you were searching for the good back then or trying to find that root of like yourself. Um, but now you've been able to transition into showing the world how this comes to be and how to help others kind of avoid that path or to really work towards finding the true path that they need to find. So, kind of to go to a different route, kind of talking about now your counterterrorism role. Um, I've seen a couple of places that you've kind of described yourself as a confidential human source regarding like your time with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Um, I just kind of wanted to know a little bit more about your roles that you had while you were with the CSIS and the RCMP. If you could just talk about those roles, obviously
Yeah,
the unclassified parts, if there are
yeah.
any.
Yeah, there are, but I don't talk about them. It's really, I mean, as long as I don't reveal, specific targets and locations, techniques, whatever. But basically, if you first, especially in the national security world, for people who are, trying to get in or studying it or a part of it, human intelligence is that large umbrella term under which I would fall. Right? You have human intelligence, signals intelligence, measurements and like mass and geoint and all kinds of stuff, right? So and human intelligence is that main pillar from which intelligence is obtained. Signals intelligence being the other one where, you're tapping phones and intercepting communications. Um, so in under human intelligence, a human intelligence source is the human being that's um, collecting the information that is actually producing the intelligence that an intelligence officer collects. Okay. So because it gets very specific when you're talking about collection versus analysis, and I mean you will have analytical or analysis aspects of analysis even though you're just a collection officer. Or you could be an analyst who could be even directing intelligence officers to collect particular information. So there is that kind of complementary relationship between an intelligence officer and an analyst. Well, at the front end of it is the human source, is the one who is actually covertly embedded within an adversary structure and is providing information on the group's activities, identities, so on and so forth, to the intelligence officer. Um, so information plus value equals intelligence. Okay. So, when people say I'm collecting intelligence or whatever, there's a very specific breakdown of what those words mean and those functions. So so technically, I am generating the intelligence that the IO is collecting. A confidential human source, CHS in the Canadian context, or a confidential human intelligence source is a British term for that. I don't like the term informant. It's a bit of a pejorative, I think, and usually informants that is a term from the policing world. And it's usually, somebody who is part of an existing criminal enterprise that then starts to work with the authorities for a number of reasons. They've been convinced to do it. They want the money. They want to get off their charges. There's a whole list of things that they get. So I don't fall into that category. I fall into the previous human intelligence source category. So that's what I did with the service, embedding myself into extremist groups, maybe individuals that were being targeted by the government for investigation. So befriend them, find out what they're up to, find out their networks, email accounts that they might be using, phone numbers, license plates for their vehicles, so on and so forth. Now, what happens in the Canadian context is the security intelligence component is done by CSIS. The federal policing component is done by the RCMP. In the US, the FBI does both. If you want to compare, in the UK, for example, you have MI5, which is the Domestic Security Intelligence Service, and then you have Scotland Yard, which is like federal policing or could be the Met Police as well. So so what happened is when the intelligence service gets information related to a case where there's a reasonable likelihood of criminal offenses being committed, it moves over to the police as a police investigation. And so I traversed over from the service to the RCMP, uh, and they do have the same designation of a confidential human source, but then there's one level up from that, which is a police agent. It's just a technical legal thing where the police can direct the individual to do certain things, and there's immunity for prosecution and things like that because obviously if I'm working undercover and I'm in a group and this group is plotting terrorist attacks and I'm participating with them, I could technically be charged, right? But so I became a police agent in that context. And in that investigation, the RCMP one ran for 6 months. And then, you're doing debriefs every day, you're writing debriefing reports, and then those reports will then get handed over to court for submission as evidence. So that's the CSIS to RCMP and everything in between.
And that transition happened for you specifically just because of the Toronto 18 case. That
Yes,
probably wouldn't have happened had that case not taken the turn it did.
that's right. If it was not a police investigation, and that's what I was doing with the service previously, right? There were numerous other investigations that I worked on, but they just never made it to the level of a police investigation, and so I stayed where I was.
That's interesting to see how different it is for each country or for each, kind of region, how we only have one branch and then Canada has, two different ways that they handle it. So that's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah.
To kind of blend the two sides, starting in extremism and then transitioning to counterterrorism and stuff like that. You're among a small group of people that has kind of seen that radicalization to exiting it, and then you're now working professionally in counterterrorism and de-radicalization. Could you just explain just a little bit of how that experience, with how unique it is, kind of shaped your perspective in, I don't know, just life, professional?
Mhm. Yeah, it definitely did that because, um, I was never supposed to be known. The secrecy was the selling point. When I was a confidential human source with the service, nobody was ever going to know who I was and what I was doing. That's the law. And when they told me that, this case is going to move over to the police, and eventually, if they do lay charges, all of this stuff is going to become public. And I had to really think about that, because I was concerned about the fallout, right, in the community. What are people going to say, this and that? And so one Muslim guy, trusted guy that I had been talking to, and who knew that I was working undercover, he's just like, he goes, well, why are you worried about what the people are going to say? Like, did you do it for the people's sake? And that really stuck with me, and it impacted me. And that ultimately is why I moved over to the police, because I said, no, I'm not doing it for the people. I'm doing it for the sake of God and sake of Islam and protecting Islam from these insider threats, like Muslim terrorists are insider threats to Islam. Um, and and then, oh man, and then all heck broke loose, right? Because I actually, before the case went public, I gave an interview. So okay, so this was so the case. Okay, so I moved over to the RCMP, and I worked in the Toronto 18 case, and I talked to a guy basically. So it was on the media, and I saw the case, and I thought to myself, oh my God, like the way that they portrayed it. And I thought to myself, oh, this is bigger than I thought it was. So I talked to one of my friends, and he knew a reporter who was a trusted reporter, and convinced me to give an interview on the. It was like a flagship news show. So there I give a public interview, and then all heck breaks loose. Everybody finds out I'm the undercover. And I wanted to get ahead of the story, basically. I didn't want the media to come start camping out in front of my parents' home, or go to the mosque or stuff like that. So I wanted to just get ahead of the story, if you will. And so expose my identity and my involvement in the case. Um, then then I was really um, online. I was attacked online. Like, people were saying all these horrible things about me and questioning my religion and my motivations and this, that, and the other. Then the court hearings occurred, and that was a whole other experience. I remember there were 14 adult offenders and four young offenders, and youth are prosecuted separately from adults. So the uh, adult preliminary hearing had 14 offenders in court, and each of those offenders had a lawyer, if not also a co-counsel. So there were like 25 lawyers in that room. And I remember telling myself that every one of these lawyers is looking to make their career over your body, basically. And they tried, to their credit, they tried, but they failed. And these experiences were training me. I realized that I was this altruistic guy who came to do the right thing, and now I'm sitting in the middle of the largest terrorism investigation in Canada, and all eyes are focused on me. I remember like little things like that I still remember to this day. Like, I'm the squeaking of my shoes when I'm walking into the courtroom, and it gets so quiet and everybody's looking at you, and I can feel the daggers, you know what I mean, from people's eyes, and having to do it all again the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that, it really trained me. Um, so after five legal hearings, um, being cross-examined, and so what I told you about the source debriefing reports that we created. So at the end of the investigation, we had two, like basically there were 2-inch binded written reports, or typed out and signed reports. After every hearing, a body of transcripts were produced. So it was funny because in the beginning, I started with two folders under my arm, until to the end of it, when I was pulling a dolly with Rubbermaid containers filled with court transcripts.
Wow.
So, and then in the middle, So I realized like, oh my God, like what I've gotten myself involved in and just discussing all the issues. So that's when I realized that I want to study this topic. And so I would actually undertake a master's degree program in policing intelligence and counterterrorism out of Macquarie University. And the program was advertised to like soldiers, diplomats, people who had relevant work experience in the topic. And so because the case was so public, I basically said, hey, like I'm the guy in this case. There's your relevant work experience. I had some university, courses that I had taken over the years, but this then got me entry into that master's program, and then studying the topic made me realize what I got myself involved in. It allowed me to make sense of knowing the differences between for example, intelligence services who have the luxury of longer term relationships, um, versus the very transactional nature of police agencies, right? Which is they're prosecuting a case. They're not there to be your buddy, right? Like, and they're going to be done with you when the case is done, right? And they're going to move on to the next case. So little things like that really it taught me how a lot of this stuff works. Then finally, when the case was done, the master's was done, and I just kept reading and studying. So on the radicalization and de-radicalization stuff, when I started studying the master's program I think it was I started it in 2008, I believe. That's when I started reading about radicalization, de-radicalization, and that's when I was like, hey, I went through this process. And I reached out to some of the scholars who had written those articles, John Horgan, many of the big names that everybody reads now. I reached out to them, and they were very nice about it. And we've continued. Obviously, we've stayed in touch, and that's why um, I am where I am now, right? It's not like I just purely studied it or I only did the practitioner related stuff. Like I blended the two things. I remained open during my experiences to always learn, to always see like, okay, what do I need to learn from this particular situation? How do I recalibrate? How do I correct my behavior or whatever needs to be corrected? And I think that's a key, I want to reinforce to the listeners and viewers is you should be like that, right? Like you're not gonna know everything, obviously. And so if you are like, I want to learn everything attitude, you'll succeed, right? Um, but it was like also the harsh reality of being involved in this stuff, right? Like it's controversial topic for some reason. I don't know where the controversy comes from, but I mean, if you think about even the undercover work, right? Like people like that they see that sense of betrayal because they see that hey you were making like you were their buddy and so I can understand if they feel the betrayal. I mean that was the point. It was to betray them. um but even in society, realizing how the public is woefully ignorant when it comes to what is required to prevent attacks, terrorist attacks, right? Like, why do people get upset with undercovers in FBI terrorism cases, but you don't hear a peep when you're talking about undercovers in biker gangs, drug gangs, child sex predator sting operations? Like, you think you're talking to little Lucy, and it's actually Agent Lucy. You got caught. It's not entrapment. You got caught. So
Hmm.
in the terrorism side, it's like if you think you're talking to an Al-Qaeda fixer and it happens to be Agent Lucy, you got caught. You didn't get set up, right?
Yeah, it
So
was you fell into the own.
yeah, you got caught. So so there was a lot of controversy that came out of that, and there's still a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation as to how these operations work because you cannot collect evidence of covert criminality except through covert collection. People who are doing bad things secretly, all right, and we live in a democratic society where you have to collect evidence and the techniques of collecting the evidence have to be publicized and all of this stuff gets publicized and the evidence gets handed over to the other side and you know so so through all of that, it just gave me a better perspective on how all this stuff actually works in real life, not just from books.
Yeah. Hearing your perspective on kind of how the world sees these types of organizations and like you said, we don't really talk about the ones that were in drug trafficking rings and stuff like that. I wanted to touch on the point you said of how it is seen as a negative light. I'm currently studying counterterrorism and homeland security at American University for my master's. And the first class I just finished was, we had to read articles of how, like, why do these groups form? Why do these people join these organizations? And the big thing that stood out to me in one of the articles was it's mainly to find a brotherhood. It's mainly to find that connection or to find that path. A lot of these individuals are lost. They don't really either have that family figure or they don't have um, that bond with anyone in their life. And so they join those organizations. And I think a lot of us don't think about that. We kind of see them as violent individuals and criminals and things like that. But at the end of the day, if you kind of scratch the surface and keep going under, you realize they're just kind of like us. Like they're just kind of
Yeah.
trying to find their people and trying to find their niche and all that stuff. So it was really interesting to hear you say that as well. Um, and how you kind of tied that back to your own
Mhm.
experience too. Um, I wanted to highlight your work with Parents for Peace. I know that's a big thing that you are working with and doing to kind of try and show individuals hey, there's some signs and things like that. So I kind of wanted to allow you to take the moment to talk about that and kind of just how that works. Like, what have you found most effective with families or even with young individuals who are searching for that path?
Mhm. Yeah. So even your initial point about a lot of these folks seeking out meaning and identity, belonging of some kind, especially belonging to a greater cause, right? Greater than themselves. And think about what that does to individuals, right? It takes them out of their perceived, nothingness of an identity of like a small nobody into this great somebody, right? You're part of this greater group, international group. You're part of this, huge global gang, really, right? And you have this, and so that this is a common thread through that. And so in the Parents for Peace side, um, uh, the organization was formed when an African American gentleman from Memphis, Tennessee. His son radicalized, went to Yemen, further radicalized, came back to America, and ended up doing a drive-by shooting at a military recruiting center, killing one soldier and critically injuring the other soldier who was there. He received a life sentence for that offense, and his dad was looking for like who do I even reach out to discuss this, like to talk about this, to make sense of this. And so that's where Parents for Peace was created. He created that organization and he sought out people. So they hired Miriam Churchill, who's our executive director, and she reached out to me. She saw what I had been doing online. She saw some of my stuff on radicalization, de-radicalization, and so on, and basically said, "Hey, like, would you come work for us at this organization?" So I think that's like 10 years ago. And so we basically deal with like hate and extremism cases. We deal with it through a public health lens, actually. Um, but it is also informed through obviously like people like myself because yeah, I mean you've heard my story and my history and my background. So I have the practitioner background, like I have my own personal background, and I have an operational background, and then I have this professional background where I've studied the topics. I've done a bunch of certifications on I've done peer support certification, motivational interviewing, that's a part of that, all the trauma-informed stuff, BTAM, behavioral threat assessment and management, informed approaches. So we're cross-trained as well. We kind of work as an interdisciplinary team. So we have people with social work backgrounds, some people also with their own personal experiences. So these are what we call formers, like former extremists. And I obviously I agree with like 'cause there's been some criticism, like just because you're a former and you had that experience doesn't make you particularly qualified to do de-radicalization work. And that's absolutely true. People come in with all kinds of baggage, right? Like they might have substance abuse issues or lingering or mental health issues, PTSD. Maybe there's some criminality was involved. Maybe they did some prison time. So it you have to really look at people's backgrounds. So I joined the organization, and we deal with these extremism and terrorism cases. So we have a helpline that you can call. So the website's parents the number 4 peace.org. And we have a helpline where people can call the helpline to say, hey, if it's a parent will call and say, hey, my kid, this is what I'm seeing, what's going on. So there's an intake protocol, and there's an initial first responder who will kind of walk them through their situation, give them some support. If it rises to the level of this person needs intervention support, then during our weekly meetings, the coordinator brings forward the case to say, hey, I talked to this person, these are the issues, blah, blah, blah. And then it will be assigned to one of the main exit interventionists. So it's not that I want to be, I want the, Islamism related cases, right? So that they will go to me, but sometimes we might tag team on a white supremacist case, right? Or an anti-government extremism case, or, look, we did an Adam Waffen case once. I was also on a militia group case, right? But most of my cases, I deal with the Islamism cases, and you see a lot of this stuff, right? Like people who are young kids who feel like they're a small zero, suddenly they become a giant hero. They put on the costume of whatever it is, and there they go. And there's like here's my quote. My quote goes like this. At times, ideology is a driver of violent extremism, but at other times is just a passenger with other psychosocial factors at the wheel. So what that formula does is it encourages you to consider, of course, the role of ideology, people who it, it, you know, rationally and cognitively engage with the ideas. They're not crazy. It's rational. Like they believe it for all intents and purposes because they believe this is the truth and I have to follow the truth. That's it. But then you might get a young guy who, he's been bullied, he's isolated, people, let's say he does come from a Muslim background, but has never, not even a practicing Muslim family, and so reaches into, his cultural background. So I'm Muslim. He's isolated, bullied, targeted. So what does he do? He becomes ISIS. Now, the fact that's why people are staying away from him because they're scared of him, right? It's a counter narrative to him being bullied and isolated, right? So now that people aren't talking to him or they're already looking at him like that, well, he's going to put on a mask, to a scary mask, so that it
Don't
justifies.
listen or,
Yeah.
you know,
I got another case where the guy has like such severe social anxiety, and he hides his eyes behind his shaggy hair. He's always like brooding, type white kid. Doesn't want to, very introverted, doesn't like people, doesn't want to be around people. So what does he do? He also puts on the ISIS mask because it's like, all right. And while he starts off with this like extremist Salafi mentality, which is very separationist, right? So no wonder. So it's no wonder that a guy who wants to isolate from the public and be like that chooses an interpretation which validates that. Oh, you're not supposed to talk to, make friends with non-Muslims. Oh, great. You don't go to their, public events and their, public things oh, great. That's exactly what he likes. And just to show you how this guy is not like religious in the true sense, his social anxiety was so great. It took him a year to go to the mosque. And the
Wow.
whole time he was chirping his ideology, or so he thought. He hadn't even gone to the mosque. So I remember I took him and we would engage in these debates, religious debates and this and that. And I was like, hold on, you haven't gone to the mosque in a whole year? I'm like, what kind of a Muslim are you? I was like, I've never heard this in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I use these techniques to show them that, hey, like this is something you should probably pay attention to. So
Too, and yeah,
yeah. So we see a lot of these cases of young kids who are just seeking other things. Remember that ideology could be a driver, but other times it's just a passenger. So I want viewers to consider that you don't just look at one thing. If a kid presents as Islamist, maybe he's not. Maybe there's
there's
something
always
else
more
going on.
branches to the tree than just
Yeah.
one. Um, to kind of close us out, in this conversation, I kind of wanted to ask like what your thoughts are on how Islamic extremist groups might change in the next, 5 to 10 years. Specifically, I know a big topic of discussion nowadays is, artificial intelligence and those types of technologies. How do you see that either playing a role by either recruitment strategies and stuff like that, or even online platforms? Do you think that we're going to see a big change regarding just the groups in general, or even with the emerging use of AI?
Yeah, I mean, terrorists, like other criminal organizations, will exploit the latest technology for their purposes, right? In the beginning, when there was no technology, well, I guess you would need a printer. But like, if you imagine, if you go all the way back, like it started with printing flyers, right? Even and then it was like as soon as the radio began, it was like, okay, radio broadcast. When the TV began, it was like, okay, TV broadcast. When the internet, with social media, we've seen it all, right? So now with AI, yeah, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to exploit it in the exact same way. And then they've already started doing this, for example, like presenting like seemingly real newscasts, right? Of like very normal looking people, like not, a guy in an ISIS mask or whatever, or a niqab or something. Um, so they're kind of using it for that purpose, like propaganda, dissemination, and things like that. Everybody's doing it, right? Like, I mean, if you haven't seen the Sora videos and all those funny stuff that people are putting out, but it's also obviously the weaponization, the disinformation, right? That AI is being used for, right? Generating fake videos to generate outrage, right? To then mobilize people to action, right? That's the chain that they're trying to promote, right? Is to get people to act out, right? Like, look at this, look at that, and everybody's doing it. Especially, ever since the October 7 attacks, there's been a huge proliferation of a lot of these fake videos. And I mean, there's real videos. There's enough, there's more than enough videos of suffering and death and destruction. But even there, they add fake videos, right? Just to show that they're using the material, they're getting better at it. And if we all remember, like AI videos, they couldn't get fingers, right? Like they would always have, they would like six fingers or two fingers would be blending into like the thumb or something dumb like that. Because it was obvious AI, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't make those mistakes anymore, right? Like,
It's very
so
difficult to figure out an
yeah.
AI generated video. Yeah.
Now you're seeing the videos out of that and they're looking really crisp. In fact, I saw the guy was just messing around with it, just showing me what he can do on Sora. And I was like, huh, that it kind of reminds me of when TV commercials first came out or when I first saw them. They kind of reminded that's how they looked, right? And so we know that very quickly they're going to get rid of all that stuff. So AI is 100%, in the tool belt of criminal groups, terrorist groups, governments, malevolent and malicious state actors, malicious individual actors. There was one. lady who I think they faked her voice, the daughter, and basically saying I've been kidnapped, da da da, and the mother panicked, and then the kid was with the dad, and dad's like, "What are you talking about?" Even to me, it happened where it was a phone spoofing. It was just spoofing my phone number, but I was sitting with my wife at the table, and I called on her phone, and it was. Oh, is this Mrs. Sheikh? Your son has been arrested. You have to pay this much money to release him on bail. And then she was like, "Oh, my son's been arrested. My husband's been arrested, huh?" So that's with a phone. Then with a voice, you're gonna get it with deep fakes, right? You're seeing that in, I think it was Malaysia, Indonesia. There was a deep fake. One of the politicians was deep faked, and as if he was saying negative things about the common people, and it it incensed them when they saw this fake video, and they attacked the finance building that he was working in or something. So
Mhm.
it is done deliberately to generate outrage, to mobilize people to action. Beyond that, you're going to look into, if you want to look into operational stuff, quantum computing, that level of AI, edge computing, things like that for sophisticated operations. That's also going to be incorporated by terrorists using AI and quantum computing to create new explosive materials, undetectable, those sorts of things. All of this is already being exploited by terrorist groups. So your question, just to kind of finish my answer, they're long-winded one, but I want it to be thorough, is I don't think terrorists will not fundamentally change. They will continue to use simple acts of violence, right? Shooting people, right? Blowing them up with explosives, things like that. Spectacle attacks, right? They love it. That's what they're there for, right? As you can see, what they're doing in the African continent, taking over countries, establishing economies, making money through that way, making money through crypto, using other things that other criminal organizations use. So they will just keep doing what they normally do, but they will be a little more enhanced with these modern tools.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today about the, emerging threat and the various aspects of your life and how you got to where you are today. Um, we really appreciate you taking the time to do that.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Yeah, just a kind of a closing thing is because I know your the network is it's a really good group of people. And I really encourage the people who are watching and listening to really, participate in the activities that you guys are doing because, this is a space that you really need to understand what you're getting involved in. Because if you do want to make it a career, and if you have ambitions to, climb the ladder, so to speak, you should really prepare yourself for what this kind of work entails, right? You're probably not going to be doing the work that I did, but understanding what I've done in my life and my background, like you are going to be dealing with people like me. You might be reading our reports, the intelligence that comes up to your desk that you're consuming. Now you know the chain that led it there, right? And so that kind of situational awareness of your workspace is going to be very important for any kind of success that you want to see in your life. So my pleasure to be with you, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you.